Hey SAP developers, this is part 3 of my hands-on blog and video series on how to build ABAP RAP applications that leverage AWS services. In the previous video, we configured the AWS SDK for SAP ABAP to enable your SAP system to securely interact with AWS S3 and Textract for document storage and OCR use cases. By the end of this video, we will be able to upload invoices and retrieve invoices from S3 in our RAP app. There's going to be 4 steps to this. We're going to download and demo the base application. We're going to create and test a wrapper class for AWS integration. We're going to implement a determination for invoice save, and we're going to be able to retrieve invoices upon request. So let's get started. So we'll be using a base RAP application because this isn't a tutorial on how to use or build a RAP application. It is a tutorial on how to integrate with S3. So the starting app is available in this Git repo, and all the links, as always, will be in the video description. Now, at the moment, this repo has 2 branches, a main branch and a starting branch. And as we go through, there'll be branches for each tutorial. So you'll be able to, if you want to follow along, you'll just have to pick the branch. And we'll be using the starting branch in today's video. We're going to select back and go to code and copy this URL to clipboard. Jumping over to Eclipse, we want to run a ABAP development object in GUI, and we want to run the Git standalone program and create a new online repo. Paste in the URL we copied, enter in a package of Z invoice, and we want to enter the branch of starting app and press create online repo. And then select pool. Select everything. Create a transport if you don't have one. And let ABAP Git do its thing. And I'll check back in once this is done. Okay, go through and hit the green tick. And it looks like it is done. So we can close Git standalone for now. Expand out your project, and in the favorite packages, add a package and add Z invoice. You can see we've pulled a number of objects. And let's just check the service binding. Mine is published. If it isn't, press the publish button. Now, before we can go and view the application, we do need to create a number range interval for this number range object. So let's go and open the GUI and go to transaction SNRO and type in the object name. Go to change, interval editing, change intervals, and the number should be number range number is 01, and it's from. It's 10 digits long. And it will go not quite to the end of the range, and simply hit save. And hit the green tick. and go back. And you can close that now. Now under Business Services, open up the service binding. Now if it says unpublished here for you, press the Publish button. Mine's already published, and then select Invoice and press Preview. So this is our starting application for managing invoices. Let's go ahead and hit Create. And as soon as we hit Create, we get this error. And it's saying that the virus scan profile has not been set up. If you don't get this error, no problems. If you do, please refer to this SAP note for how to fix it. And this is especially important if what you're building will go to production. I'm in a Docker system. What I'm building will never go through to production. So I'm just going to show you now on how to turn this off. So let's go back to Eclipse and open up the GUI. And we want to go to transaction /iwfnd/virus_scan. And we want to make sure both of these are ticked and press execute. Let's go back and close the error and refresh. Now when we hit create, the error will no longer occur. And you can see here that there is some header information for invoices, some line item information, and some costs. You can see here how we can add an attachment. So let's go ahead and add an attachment. And this attachment is getting stored in the database at the moment. And so if we hit create, it will successfully create, and we retrieve the invoice. But this invoice is stored in the database, and so when we're complete with this video, we will be able to do the same thing and download, but it'll all be within S3. And then there's some actions for approving and rejecting an invoice. So we've successfully downloaded and demoed the base application. And now we're up to step 2, where we're going to create and test a wrapper class for AWS integration. So on the AWS website, they have some examples of the operations we will need to perform with our wrap application. So here's an example of get object, which will allow us to retrieve an invoice from S3. We'll also be using put object, which is to transfer an invoice into S3. And we will also need to use a delete object. Now you might be wondering why wrapper class is necessary. Well, wrapper class is necessary because these 3 operations here, using our SDK profile, converting our logical resource, and creating an S3 object, is going to be required for each of these operations. And I'd prefer to define these constants in only one place, and that's why we will be using a wrapper class. So let's go ahead and right-click the Z invoice package and go new class. Now we're going to call this class ZDM_CL_AWS_invoice_storage. And we're going to call this invoice storage wrapper class. And we'll select next and select our transport and hit finish. Okay, so let's go ahead and think about what we need. So first up, we need a constructor. And that constructor, I want to pass in an invoice ID. And the type of that invoice is ZDM_int for internal number and invnum. Okay. and the implementation's missing. Okay, and let's add the implementation. Okay, and so what do we want to do? Well, let's go back here and copy these 3 lines. And so this was our test program that we used in the last video. And let's put those in the constructor. But what we want to do is let's create a constant for this for Z invoice. So we'll call that, we'll go in the private section, so constants. And let's call this Z CV underscore PL, PFL. And the type of that is an AWS type. I'll just put that in there. And so I got that type by going into here and looking at the, and I've just taken it from here. Okay. And so now we can use this constant here instead of that. And the next is for our logical resource. So let's go ahead and create a definition from our logical resource. And let's take all of that and create another constant. Value. Okay, let's prefix that with a C, and let's put that in here. Excellent. Now we want to be able to access this from other methods, so we do need to create a variable in the private section for that. So it's going to be data. It's going to be called bucket, and it's got this AWS type. So we can remove that, and we want to do this same thing with this S3 object, and we're just going to call that O underscore S3. And once again, we need a new variable, and let's put that in there. Okay, and lastly, we want to store that invoice ID that we take in here. So let's take that and put one last variable in here, and that is for invoice ID. And we want to do that assignment. So let's do that and control space and pick the importing variable. And let's format that by pressing Shift F1. Excellent. And let's press save. Okay, now there are some warnings here. There's some exceptions this raises. And let's look at the quick assist. And we want to raise 3 declarations. So we'll put those in there. And that has added these raisings into us there. So what other methods do we need? Well, we need a get object, and we need a delete object, and we need a put object. So let's go to the definitions and create a method for get underscore object. And the parameters for this is just going to be a file name. So iv underscore file name. And the type for that is ZDM. And let's have a look to see what we've got. And let's pick this ZDM file underscore name. And this does have a returning. So let's go on a new line and go returning value, and let's call it result. And the result is going to be an X string. And let's format once again. I don't like that. Let's that on a new line. Okay, excellent. Now let's add an implementation for that. And while we're at it, let's copy this and create a delete object. A delete object is going to take a file name, but it won't return anything. Let's format once again. Okay, let's create a method for put object. And that's going to have 3 importing parameters. So it's going to take a file name, an old file name, and a body. More format. And let's add the implementation. And let's save. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement the get object method. So let's head over to the AWS website. We'll go the get object. And we simply want to copy this code here. We'll go back to Eclipse. And let's paste that in and see what we're working with. So first of all, we need to define this OO result. Now, it refers to this S3 object, which is what we have here in our variables. So let's go and put that in. It needs a bucket name. Once again, we have that, and our variable is called bucket. And we need the file name. And so this is one of our importing variables, and we can simply go file name. And lastly, we need to set the returning variable, and our returning variable here is called result. The file name is not compatible, so let's go into get object and look at the definition. And you can see here that the item here is this variable type. Let's go back, and we could simply go conv, place that type, and do a conversion and add another bracket. And save, and let's give that a format. And it's complaining that it raises these exceptions. So once again, let's add the 2 raising declarations. And so it is added these here. Now let's go ahead and do a very similar thing for delete, but rather than going to the AWS website, let's just use the quick assist. So it's an operation on the S3 object. So we'll paste that in, and let's press Control space and type in delete. We want to go delete object. Okay, and we're going to pass in the bucket name and the key. And it is going to be exactly the same as what we have here. Okay, that's done. And we'll add 2 raising declarations again. Let's press save. So with put object, it's going to do a number of things. First, it's going to take the uploaded attachment and rename it. It's going to rename it to contain the invoice number and then take the extension. So the invoice uploaded could be named invoice for services, but it would get renamed to 00001, and if it was a PDF, the extension would be .pdf. We are then going to check to see if a previous invoice exists for this invoice number. And if it is, it's going to go and delete it. And then it's going to go and store the new invoice in the in S3. And so maybe what we'll do is let's go have a look at that invoice we uploaded earlier. And we'll go to the database tables, and we want to go to this active invoice header table. And let's go open with, and we'll go data preview. And we'll go across to here. So you can see here that the temp file name is invoice1.pdf, and that would get renamed, and we know it's a PDF. And here's the attachment. And so if a new invoice came in, well, it's going to have a existing file name, so we know what the file name is, and then we can go and delete that. So let's go back to our class. So we need a new method, and the new method is going to be called get_file name. It's going to have an importing variable, and it's going to be iv_file name, and it's going to have that same type. And it's going to return a file name. Let's format that and let's implement it. Okay, so let's create a variable, and we'll call that lvext for the extension. We'll make it a string. And so what we want to do is we want to get the extension from the inputted file name. So if the file name was file.txt, we'd want to get the extension would be txt, and if the file name was invoice.pdf, we would get a PDF, and if the file name was something like this.pdf, we would want to make sure it returned PDF. Now to do this, I have settled on using a regular expression. Originally, I did have I used a class that SAP provides. The problem with this class is it wasn't ABAP Cloud compatible. So by using a regular expression, it should be compatible with all SAP systems. So here's the regular expression I used. And if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I asked ChatGPT to create me a regular expression for extracting the extensions out of file names. But I did test it, and there is a ABAP program that you can use to test regular expressions. And so if we open ABAP development objects and go demo_regex and run that, we can put in the reject, and we're going to use this PCRE option, and we can put in some text. And so let's think of our first example, test.txt. We expect it to return txt. Execute. And you can see it's returned txt. And our second scenario is where there was multiple dots. And you can see here that it is returning txt. So the regular expression does work. And so we're going to use that in our program. And we can close both of those windows now. And so this is that option we picked in the demo program. and the extension is going to go here. And so now what we need to do is we need to say, well, the result is equal to, and we want the invoice ID that is a global variable. We want a dot, and then we want to put in the our variable here, LV_ext. And so this will rename our file for us. And while we're here, let's press save. And so let's say with put object, we can now, let's create a new variable called new_filename. And that is going to call this get file name. And it's going to have a importing variable file name and file name. And so now we've got a new file name. Let's see if we need to delete the existing file. So let's go if. So if the old file name is not initial, so if it's not blank, if you're creating it for the first time, then the old file name will be blank. And then we want to make sure that no, if it's not blank, we want to delete it. So let's just end that there. And how do we delete a file? Well, we'll just call our delete object method, and we need to pass it a file name. So let's add the file name in, and we want to select that old file name. And we want to raise these two exceptions. Let's format. Okay. Okay, and lastly, we want to do a put object. So let's use our global S3 object. A pick put object, and so we're going to need to tell it what bucket, what the file name should be, and what the body is. So let's copy these two from here, and we need to pass in the body. And format that. And activate. So we'll get the new file name. If the old one exists, we'll delete it, and then we'll store the attachment in S3 by calling put object. So let's go ahead and test this. So we can go at the top and go run. We go run as an ABAP application. And let's create an instance of this class, and the invoice ID will be all nines. And let's go hit create instance. And let's test this get file name. So the input file name could be anything. So it could be sample invoice.txt. And this rename should return the invoice number, and it does, along with the extension. So the user could upload a file name like this, but it's going to get renamed and stored as this. And let's go ahead and do a put object. So we'll do a put. So we pass in the input file name, so sample invoice.txt. The old file name is going to be blank, and let's add a body and run that. Okay, so it appears to be successful. Let's go have a look in S3. We'll reload that. Go to your S3 bucket. Okay, so there looks like to be a bug. It has created this sample invoice file. It should have been renamed. So let's go and look at our code and see what the problem might be. So here's our put object, and the key we should be using this new file name. So we should be putting the new file name into here as the file name for the put request. So we can save that and activate, and let's run it again. Run as ABAP application. Let's create an instance. We'll fill in all nines. Okay, and let's do another put object. The file name could be anything.txt. We'll go back. We'll leave the. Let's fill in the old file name as sample invoice.txt, and we'll fill in a body and run that. And so the file that is uploaded should be the invoice ID. So let's run that. Okay, and let's go have a look in S3 and hit reload. So the put has deleted that old file because we specified it and created this new file for us here. And the last operation, because we just tested the delete, is this get object. So let's go get object and put in that file name. And I'm going to copy it straight from S3. Put that in there. And we'll do a get. And it's returned the file for us. So our wrapper class is now complete. Okay, so the third step is to implement a determination for invoice save. And let's get started on that. Okay, so let's go to our Project Explorer, expand out CDS and behavior definitions, and select ZDM_R_IMV HDRTP. Okay, and let's add a new determination, and we'll call this upload to S3, and we want this to be on save and create and update. And let's save and activate this and use this quick assist to add an implementation. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, for starters, we need to read the invoice. So we can do that with some EML in local mode. We want to read the invoice entity. Let's bring in all fields with corresponding, and let's pass in the keys. And we want the result to be in an internal table, and let's call it LT invoices entity. Okay. Then we want to loop through these. So let's go loop at the internal table into data, and let's call this invoice entity. And let's put a where on this, and let's say where the temp attachment, so that's where the file is stored, is not initial. And let's close that loop. Because if a user hasn't uploaded the attachment, we don't want to do anything with it. Okay, and let's define a variable up here, and we're going to call that LV underscore success. It's going to be a Boolean, but we're going to just assign that straight to ABAP false. Okay, now we need to get an instance of our AWS helper class. And we're going to call this storage helper. And let's say is equal to new, and that's ZDM invoice storage. And we need to pass it that invoice ID, which will be in our invoice entity. Okay. And we simply want to do a put. So let's call our put method. Okay, and it's going to have we need to pass in a file name. And we know that is going to be from our invoice entity, and it's going to be temp file name. We also know we need to bring in a old file name. And so for old file name, and this will become clear soon, but we're going to put it in this file name field. And then IV, and we want the body of the attachment, so let's go and do that, IV body, and it's going to be the invoices entity once again, and temp attachment. Okay, and let's format that. And let me just explain what this file name and temp file name is here. So if we go to the definition of our table, so when a user uploads the invoice in draft mode, it will fill in these three fields for us: the MIME type, the file name, and the attachment. And when this determination runs, it's going to store the invoice in S3, and it will put the new file name in this field and the MIME type in here. And then upon completion, we'll clear out these temp fields for us. And so a new file name is stored in the temp file name, and the old file name is the one that's persisted in S3 and is in this field. Okay, so let's surround this in a try catch, and let's place this also in the try catch. But there's one exception missing. And so if we put our mouse over this, we can see we need to also implement this auth, not implement, we need to catch this auth implement there. Okay, and that warning's disappeared. Okay. Now, so it will try this now. If it fails, it will go into this catch. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to, by default, it's successful. And if an exception occurs, we're going to set that to false. Okay, and out of the try catch, we want to then say if LV success is equal to ABAP true, and then else, and end if. And so what do we need to do if it's true? Well, if it is true, we want to set the file name, the new file name, and remember the invoice gets renamed. So what we actually need to do is we need to call storage helper again, and we need to get the file name, and we just need to pass in the temp file name. And so this will be the file name that was used to store in S3. Okay, and we also need to set the MIME type. And this is just going to be the temp MIME type. And because it's successful, we can now clear out the temp fields. So it is temp attachment. And I'm just going to copy that and clear out the temp MIME type and the temp file name. Okay, but if it fails, well, we need to return a message to our end user. I think I'm just going to paste this in here. And so in this reported invoice table, we are inserting a new row, and it's against the temp attachment. And we're going to be saying a new message, and it's unable to store invoice. Now, the final thing is we need to do another bit of EML to modify the invoice entity because we've changed these fields. So let's go and do that. So modify entities. It's the ZDM inv header TP. And once again, it's in local mode. There should be an of here. The entity is the invoice. And what are we updating? So we need to say update fields, and now we need to pass in a list of fields. So we're updating the temp attachment field. We're updating the file name, the MIME type, and we're also updating this file name and this MIME type. And now we need to provide values. So with value, and let's go hash. So we need to pass in the key, and that is, the key is on the invoice entity, and we need to say is draft, and do the same thing, is draft, and I might put these on new lines. Put a stop there. Okay, and then we need to update the temp attachment. Okay, and then let's just copy this line down for the temp file name, the MIME type, file name, and then we will simply copy and paste the fields in. So let's actually do file name first, just do it in the same order, and then file name, and then the MIME types. Okay, and we need to say, let's just put in a failed data, call that failed underscore update, and reported data, we'll call that reported underscore update. Let's format that and save and activate. And let's just do a quick review. So we're going to read the invoices in. We're going to loop over them where it's not initial. By default, success is true. We're going to attempt to store the object in S3. If it fails, it goes to false. If success is true, then we're going to set the file name to be the new file name and the MIME type of the temp attachments and clear out the temps. Okay, then we're going to modify the entity by updating the fields we've set up here. Okay, and if it fails, we're going to insert a message, and that's it. So now let's go and do a test. So I'm going to open up the service binding, select invoice, and go preview. Let's go create, add a local attachment. And so at this point, it's stored in those temp fields, and it's on create that the determination will get invoked. So let's go create. Now it says it's successful. This was invoice 2, and you'll see here it's no longer in the local attachment, and that's because this annotation is pointing to those temp fields. So that is okay. Let's go to S3. Store refresh. Okay, we can see that there is a PDF here with 2, and let's go click into that and download. And it's open, and you can see that the invoice has been successfully stored in S3. So now we're up to step number 4, which is retrieving invoices upon request. And there's some bonus content too, because we do need to delete invoices from S3 if the invoice is deleted from the RAP application. So let's go and complete step 4 now. Okay, so we're back in Eclipse now. Let's go take a look at the active table for invoices. So it's in dictionary, database tables, and this actor invoice header table, and go right click, open with, and go data preview. Now it's invoice number 2 where we've stored a document in S3. And as you can see with this one, the temp fields are clear and the file name and the MIME type is filled in. And so for us to for our user to retrieve the invoice from S3, we need to provide a link in the Fury application, and the link will contain the file name. And when that link is clicked, the download will be retrieved for the user. We can do this by implementing a virtual field in our consumption view, CDS view. So open up ZDM underscore C underscore inv HDRTP. And let's add under file name a virtual field. And we'll call that attachment. And the data type for that is going to be ZDM underscore file underscore attachment. Okay, we need to Now we need to calculate this field. And so we can do this with an annotation, and that's object model dot, and we want to type in virtual field calculated by, and we need to pass in a class. So we're going to say ABAP, and then we're going to create a class called ZDM underscore CL underscore AWS underscore invoice underscore retrieve. And we can save that. Okay, and it's complaining the class doesn't exist, and it's correct. So let's go ahead and create that class. So we'll call this calculated invoice. Next. Finish. Now we can probably activate this now. Okay, so that's resolved. We need to go to this class now. And for Okay, we can go to this class now, and to calculate fields, we need to specify an interface, and that interface is just going to provide us, it should be in the public section, it's going to give us two methods to implement. And let's implement those, and we're only going to need to implement this calculate. Okay, so let's get started with the implementation. So we need to create a internal table. So we're going to call that original data, and the type of that is going to be the same type as the CDS view where we specified that virtual element. So it is ZDM underscore C, and it's this header table. Okay, now there is an importing table called a similar thing. So we are going to populate that with that importing table, IT underscore original data. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to loop over our internal table. And we're going to be assigning this to a field symbol because we're going to be updating that attachment field which is calculated. Okay, and let's just close off the loop. Okay, so we only want to retrieve the invoice from S3 if file name is populated. So if we go back to here, when the temp fields are filled in like this, there's no invoice in S3, file name is blank, so we don't want to do anything. It's only if this file name has something populated. So we can do that by saying if the file name is not initial, and what we need to do, we need to get an instance of our invoice storage class and call the get object. So let's say data storage underscore helper is equal to new ZDM CL underscore AWS storage. Now we need to pass in the invoice ID, which we will have invoice ID. And now what we want to do is call the get object and place its result in the attachment. So let's say attachment, and it is equal to storage helper get object, and we need to tell it what object to get, and that is going to be a file name, and it is the file name like that. Now this is going to complain about exceptions again, so let's go and surround this in a try catch. But we also need to bring in the declaration in there as well, like this. And I think it's got one more. So it's this auth generic, so let's put that in like that. Okay. And now all we want to do is we need to pass back our LT original data. And so we can do that. There's a changing variable called CT underscore calculated data. and we want to map that into our internal table where we've modified that attachment. So this will calculate it for us. So let's activate that. But we do need to display that field to our user. And we can do that by some CDS annotations. Let's go back. Oh, and we also need to specify this large object for our attachment. So we'll add that above. And this is telling the Fury application this is a file, and we want to make sure that we're passing in the MIME type and file name rather than the temp file names. Okay, now we need to display it. So let's go to the metadata annotation or metadata extensions. And let's scroll down to where the attachment is. And let's just copy that, paste, call it attachment, and we'll call it stored attachment. And we'll change that to position 20. We can save and activate. And let's go and view the result. Okay, so let's take a look at our application. We'll give it a quick refresh. And it was invoice number 2. You can see here now that a stored attachment is present with this link to the file name. And if we click this, it successfully retrieves the invoice from S3. So we've successfully uploaded an invoice to S3. We can now retrieve the invoice from S3. But if I was to press delete and say, are you sure you want to delete, and press delete, the invoice has been deleted in our Fury application. But if we refresh our bucket, the invoice is still there, and we don't want that. So let's go and implement the logic now for that delete scenario. To do that, let's go back to Eclipse, expand out behavior definitions, and open zdm_r_inv_head_tp. Now to do this, we want to do an additional save. So at the top, just before early numbering, type in with additional save. And save and activate. So there's a warning at the top here to say that we need to redefine method save modified. So we can go and do that now. So we want to open up the class here, and it's the header class, and it's this local LHC_invoice. And so you can see this error here to say it must be redefined. And so we can say methods save modified redefinition. And we can just add the implementation for that save modified here. And what does the save modified look like? Well, let's go have a look at the definition. And in the definition, it passes a create, an update, or delete. And so we want to see if the delete has any data. Otherwise, we don't need to do anything. Let's go back to our class. So now let's implement this additional save. Now we only want to do anything if the delete invoice table has anything in it. And so we can say delete invoice is not initial. Now this is just going to contain a list of invoice IDs. I can't seem to get the file names to populate in this, even if I specify with additional save with all fields here. So we're going to have to go and retrieve those. And so we can do that by saying like select invoice ID and file name from ZDM underscore R underscore inv. Yep. Where? So for all entries, in, and it's all entries in delete dash invoice, where invoice ID is equal to, we need to escape that, delete invoice ID. And we want to put that, all the results into an internal table. So into table, and let's call this LT underscore file names. Okay, excellent. Now we want to loop at that internal table. So loop at LT underscore file names. Into ls file names, and that's not declared, so we'll have to put a data there. And let's say, let's end if, and what's it complaining about? Should be a rookie mistakes here. Okay. And what's it complaining about now? It's the spaces. Okay, but let's put a where on this. So where file name is not initial. So we don't want to do anything if there's no invoice in S3. Okay, and now what we need to do is we need to call the delete object method of our wrapper class. So let's actually just go back to this calculate, and let's just steal this try catch. And let's put that in, copy that in. Okay, let's take a look. So we need to pass in the invoice ID. Okay, we can get rid of that, but we need to call the delete. So delete object. Still going to want a file name. Let's just replace that with that and save. So it's going to retrieve the file name. It's going to loop through them where it's not initial, and it's going to try do the delete. So save and activate that. And let's go take a look. Okay, so create a new entry, upload an attachment, and save. So this is invoice 4. It looks like it's there. Let's check S3. Yep, it's loaded. So now let's go and delete that. The invoice is deleted. Let's check. And now if we refresh S3, it's no longer there. So that's it for this video. All the links will be in the video description, including GitHub repos, for branches for the starting app and where we finished today. And in the next video, we will implement some OCR to read the contents of the invoice and automatically fill in all the fields on the screen. And we'll be using the AWS Textract service for that. So please like and subscribe, as that is the best way for you to find out when the next video is released. And please provide any feedback you do in the comments. Thank you.